Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 24th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that by Marine VHF or NOAA Weather Radio, going to our website at weather.gov/Alaska or calling the weather info line at 800-472-0391. If you've taken a look at Facebook today, you would have seen an announcement from the National Weather Service in Fairbanks talking about the snow coming to the Middle Tanana Valley. We'll have more on that here in just a minute. But a quick summary is they're expecting snow. And if you're in that region, do expect conditions to worsen fairly quickly as we head into tomorrow, lasting all the way into Saturday. It could include some gusty winds and certainly the first snow of the season for you. You can follow along on Twitter as well. NWS Alaska, NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, and NWS Anchorage. All great ways to get information during the day. And no matter where you are on Twitter, if you'd like to share pictures of your first snow or perhaps some of the waves in Shishmaref, if you're using the hashtag AKwx, it's short for Alaska Weather, will help us see that information and know that you're talking about Alaska Weather, whether you tag us on our social media accounts or not. And YouTube is a great way to get a quick, brief summary of what's going on throughout the day, especially around 3:45 to 4 o'clock or so in the afternoon. It's the same forecast that you'll hear on Alaska Public Radio. And certainly you'll be able to see the maps that go along with it if you find that on YouTube. Now on to the snow in the Middle Tanana Valley and the central interior, as well as Denali and areas around Healy and into the upper Kuskokwim Valley. First and foremost, there's going to be a big rush of wind coming through, and gusts could reach up to 40 miles per hour in some places, especially along some of the higher hilltops and certainly the gaps and passes there. With that said, colder air is rushing in, and temperatures will fall fairly quickly as we get into the next 24 hours. With that comes the opportunity of snow. It looks like around the lower valley parts for the Middle Tanana Valley, that would include Fairbanks, you're probably talking about 2 to 3 inches of snow, so some of that will be blowing around. But on the higher hilltops, that could be as much as 3 to 5 inches of snow. So plan for some changes in short order there in the Middle Tanana Valley. Winter weather advisory is posted for you, and again, things should improve by Saturday morning. And it looks like around the central interior, especially for Denali National Park in Healy, you're also talking about 3 to 5 inches of snow in general. There could be some lower amounts a little bit lower down into the valleys, like around Tanana, for example. But you're going to be dealing with some winds. And if you're out across some of the western areas of Denali National Park, perhaps some of the rangers can tell your friends a little bit further down the road that conditions are going to change very quickly as we head through the daytime tomorrow, and again stay fairly blustery with some periods of snow that'll take you into Saturday morning. The upper Kuskokwim Valley also talking about a winter weather advisory for you, and it looks like snow is on the way for tomorrow and into Saturday there. Again, a 3 to 5 inch snow possible in some of the higher terrain areas and the hilltops. In general, the best chance for accumulating snow is going to be above 3,000 feet for places like Denali and Healy in the central interior and into the upper Kuskokwim. The Middle Tanana Valley and lower for Fairbanks included, again, about 2 to 3 inches of snow is possible there. Now, that's not what's happening across the northwest coast. For the last couple days, we've been talking about stronger winds coming in and that stronger gale developing outside of the Kotzebue Sound region, working its way into Kotzebue Sound, is certainly being watched very carefully with the northwesterly winds. Most areas have coastal flood or high surf advisories, I should say, high surf advisories for areas from Wainwright to Point Hope down to Kotzebue, all the way from Deering to Shishmaref. Most of these areas are going to see some wave run up there and probably some minor beach erosion and some higher surf than normal. And it looks like that will be the trend as we head into the next 24 hours or so. Some locations have already started their advisory now. Other locations will start about 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. But what you really need to know is that the winds will worsen as we go through the rest of tonight and into tomorrow morning, and then gradually subside as we get into Friday afternoon and Friday evening before things are a lot better as we get into Saturday. We'll have that specific wind forecast for you in just a few minutes, but once again, high surf advisories are in effect or about to be in effect for many locations across the northwestern parts of Alaska. So a pretty decent dose of wind coming your way. Let's take a trip out to the central and northern Pacific and the Bering Sea quickly and look at the satellite trends here. You can see low pressure has been working up strong southerly flow across the western Bering. A lot of that moisture has been traveling up the west coast from south to north. But out around Wrangel Island today, the low pressure system that we've been watching here is starting to travel east and southeast. This is what's going to make its way across the northwestern coast and into northern Alaska, allowing colder air to drop very quickly southward as we go through the remainder of the weekend. As you look at the rest of Alaska, you can see low pressure across the eastern Gulf. This is stirring up widely scattered showers. Don't be surprised if you get an isolated thunderstorm, maybe even some small hail out of that. Most of that will stay out over the marine areas, but again, it's always wise that if you start to see those clouds bubbling up in quick succession, that plan for a lightning strike or two and make sure you're seeking safe harbor and getting out of the way there. Most areas will see a better chance of seeing light rainfall across the southern third of the panhandle tonight, if anywhere. South Central is looking fairly dry tonight and certainly cool. Across the interior, clouds have been building in, and we're watching the low pressure system coming across from Wrangel Island, dropping to the south and east. And already you can see clouds are building in across the north slope there with that. We're running into some of that warmer air that's been across the west coast for about 24 hours now. As we look at the surface weather map, you can see the low pressure system this afternoon was down to 991 millibars. Southerly winds out ahead of that and colder northerly flow behind it. Looking for snow to continue across the north slope and in areas around Kotzebue Sound like Kivalina and Kotzebue. On the south side of the sound, or on the northern side of the Seward Peninsula, however you'd like to cut it, there was a little bit more rain there as we were seeing the warmer air still having a little bit of an impact, but that will change. For light rain across areas of eastern Prince William Sound, most of that was fairly hit and miss today. And you can see low pressure just offshore of Sitka and southward at 999 millibars, with high pressure still in charge of the southern Bering and the North Pacific at 1,030 millibars. By tonight, the low will drop to about 987 millibars, and this is going to allow a little bit of a stronger north and northwesterly wind to cut into Kotzebue Sound. So gales are expected there as we go into Friday. Look for the front to work its way across the central interior. Out ahead of that, snow will start to fall across some of the higher terrain in the central and western interior, as well as places in the upper Kuskokwim Valley and eventually into the middle Tanana Valley as we get into Friday. So driving around Fairbanks, again with gusty winds there up to 40 miles per hour and snow falling, could reduce visibility and make things a little slick. So plan accordingly. This is the first foray into winter for many folks in the interior. And we know how that goes, right? Just be careful out there. Low pressure out across the western Bering. You can see scattered areas of generally light rain all the way into the lower areas of the YK Delta and southwestern Alaska. Behind that, with snow in the morning for Friday around some parts of the central interior, there might be a little bit of warmer air wrapping into this, and that could change over during the day to a little more rainfall. So just because you see snow in the morning doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have that all day long, but it is going to be significantly colder and certainly a little bit more on the gloomy, wetter, wintry side as we go into late September with this cool blast of winter. Now, high pressure settles in fairly quickly for Saturday. You can see scattered areas of snow showers still continue along the Yukon Valley. Snow is still possible across the northern parts in the higher terrain of the Alaska Range. To the south side of that and for south central, a better chance for some light rain exists with warmer air working its way through the Gulf and heading back into southeastern Alaska, encouraging a chance for some more moderate to occasionally heavy rainfall there. Showers of snow still continue across the Yukon and the North Slope, generally north of the Brooks Range, as high pressure is pumping in more of a northerly flow there. But more importantly than anything else, the winds are going to settle down across the northwestern slopes of Alaska by Saturday. So look for big improvement by Saturday. Friday is going to be kind of a rough day along the northwest coast, and it's certainly a windy and snowy day for parts of the central interior. With another wave of low pressure developing in the central Bering at 995 millibars, we'll see that return to south and westerly winds coming back into the central and eastern chain, and eventually that wetter, more seasonable flow coming back into the southern coastlines of Alaska, including southeast. Now on to temperatures. You'll notice most of the interior was considerably cooler today, mid to upper 30s to lower 40s for many. South Central in the 40s and 50s. Southeast saw temperatures in the upper 40s to mid 50s. Areas around Juneau, Haines, and Skagway on the milder side. Ketchikan and Nanette a little bit cooler there. As you get out toward Kodiak Island, either end of the island, fairly close to 50 degrees today. Fairbanks saw 41, 38 in Eagle, 34 in Fort Yukon. AKwx Pass dropped to 27. Lower to mid-30s for most of the Arctic coast. Kaktovik 31, Barrow 1 degree warmer, Wainwright 34, and 30s and 40s around the Chukchi Seacoast and into Kotzebue Sound. That warm air still holding on, and that's the reason we're seeing rain there from Shishmaref to about Deering. Kotzebue was down to 36. Unalakleet had 36 degrees. McGrath was looking at 39 with Grayling at 34. Bethel still in the 40s this afternoon, and many areas in south central or southwest were dropping into the lower 40s as well. Upper 40s and lower 50s for most of the peninsula, close to 50 for the Pribilofs, and mid to upper 50s for the central chain with Shemya at 53. Overnight low temperatures will hang out fairly close to the freezing point for the middle Tanana Valley and westward. And once you get out toward the southwest coast, temperatures jump back up into the mid-40s as that warmer air really has a big impact. In fact, most of the peninsula might hold on to temps closer to 50 overnight. Southeast will be considerably cooler than that in the lower 40s, and even colder still south central in the lower 30s and probably some in the upper 20s. The Copper River Basin could be looking at temperatures in the teens. The Arctic coast will hang out just below the freezing point, lower 30s for you, with high temperatures not changing much tomorrow afternoon. Nome will be closer to 38. Southwest stays warm in the mid-40s and lower 50s as the winds pick up. South central, upper 40s and lower 50s, and Kodiak could reach close to 60 degrees with Fairbanks heading for a high of 36. Flying weather is going to be changing, of course. For the northwest, it looks like a fairly tough day to fly. With the winds coming in, visibility will drop. IFR conditions around the Chukchi Seacoast and especially the southern part of Kotzebue Sound and the northern sections of the Seward Peninsula. MVFR for most of the North Slope, parts of the middle and western Tanana Valley, as well as areas across the central interior. Watch for changing conditions throughout the day. This is more of a glimpse at late afternoon. And out across the YK Delta, expect IFR conditions there from Nunivak Island eastward into the upper Kuskokwim, as well as the west-facing slopes of the Alaska Range and most of the central and western chain. MVFR conditions for parts of southeast. Your past conditions include AKwx heading for MVFR after a day of IFR in the morning. Same goes for Adigan Pass. Slow improvements to be had, but not a whole lot. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass turning over to IFR, especially on the western side. Rainy Pass heading that way as well. IFR by the end of the day. Windy Pass should turn over to MVFR conditions throughout your Friday. Isabel Pass looks A-OK for the moment. Mentasta Pass still holding on to VFR conditions, and Tanita Pass probably heading for MVFR by the end of your Friday, with Portage Pass doing the same, and Chilkoot and White Pass also looking for lowered ceilings as we go throughout your Friday afternoon. The freezing levels show the big change coming our way. The warm air really not lifting a whole lot further northward as the surface cold drops a little bit further southward into northern parts of southeast as well as the Yukon. Look for a very sharp gradient in the upper level warmth from 2,000 feet to around Norton Sound to about 12,000 feet in the central and western Aleutians, and that changes our icing potential just a little bit. You'll notice that's setting up around that boundary, working through the Bering Sea right now, with levels anywhere from 7 to about 10,000 feet for light to isolated moderate. There's probably a little bit better chance just ahead of the low pressure system working eastward. We'll say that's above 3,000 feet for tomorrow. And there's a patch of moisture sitting across the central Aleutians tomorrow above 10,000 feet that could warrant occasional moderate. The jet stream has a very large dip in it right now across the eastern Gulf and the western Pacific, and a very fast-moving river of air cutting right into Alaska. At 130 knots, it's giving us that punch at the surface to generate snow and wind for a large part of the interior and the mountains, as well as areas across the northwestern coast. At 9,000 feet, you see the same pattern there, the broad westerly flow with 25 to 50 knots cutting across the heart of Alaska. Northwesterly winds coming across the Chukchi Sea at 20 to 30 knots at 9,000 feet, with broad westerly sweeping over the Gulf at 15 to 25. Across the interior in the west, 20 to 30 knots. And there's our northwesterly flow again into the northwestern coast at 25 to 30 knots there, with high pressure south of the Alaska Peninsula. Turbulence is going to be an issue tomorrow. Watch for areas of low-level wind shear, and off the ground, light to isolated moderate should be expected across the northwest coast, the northern tip of the Seward Peninsula, the interior all the way into the upper Kuskokwim, parts of Bristol Bay, and in the gaps coming into Kodiak Island and along the peninsula, as well as the central chain. Most areas below 4,000 feet across the interior that could extend upwards to about 6,000 feet and below. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll have a look at your marine weather and sea ice edge here in just a few minutes.
supermoon, harvest moon, tetrad completing total lunar eclipse.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. James, I have some unbelievably exciting news.
Ooh.
You should probably sit down for this.
Okay.
Do you remember how we've had a series of lunar eclipses over the past 18 months?
Yes, the so-called tetrad. 4 total lunar eclipses in a row, and we've had 3 so far with 1 more to go.
Exactly. Now the next lunar eclipse will be this Sunday night, September 27th, and this will be the 4th in the tetrad. But wait, there's more. It will also be the night of the closest and largest full moon of the year, the supermoon.
Holy moly. And I have something for you. You better sit down for this.
Okay.
Now, not only will this eclipse fall on the supermoon for 2015, but it will also be the harvest moon.
No way.
Yes way.
Let's show you.
Okay, let's set the scene for the supermoon, harvest moon, tetrad completing total lunar eclipse. Since this eclipse will be happening on a Sunday night, we'd like you to make the most of it. First, we're facing west to watch the sunset.
Ah, I love a good sunset. Okay, enough of that. Let's turn 180 degrees and face east. Aha, there's the full moon rising on the other side of the sky. That makes sense, since for an eclipse to occur, we need a full moon. And a full moon occurs when it is opposite of the sun. So for any full moon, as the sun sets in the west, the moon will rise in the east. I really like to watch a moon rise. If you time it just right, you can catch a hint of it in the treetops. Then it emerges very red and orange in color and looks really huge. The full moon on September 27th should look a little larger than normal, since it's also a supermoon. It'll be slightly closer to us and therefore look bigger. See if you can tell.
You'll start to see the eclipse at 9:07 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So for folks out west, the moon won't be up in the sky at the beginning, but be patient, because you'll still see the best part.
The shadow of the Earth will slowly creep across the lunar surface until totality. That's when the moon is completely in the shadow of the Earth and will turn an eerie shade of red. This will occur from 10:11 until 11:23 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Then the moon will leave the shadow and it will return to a normal full moon by 12:27 a.m. on the 28th.
And that could cause some confusion, since many websites claim that the eclipse will be on the 28th. That is true if you live in England and Europe. But for us Americans, it will start on the night of the 27th and spill over into the next morning. Lunar eclipses can happen about every 177 days, but it's pretty rare to have 4 total lunar eclipses back to back to back to back like this, and all of them visible in the United States. The first total lunar eclipse in the tetrad occurred on April 15th, 2014.
The second was on October 8th, 2014.
The third was on April 4th, 2015.
And the last one will be this Sunday night, September 27th. But the next total lunar eclipse visible in the United States won't be until January 31st, 2018. This full moon will also be a harvest moon. There are lots of definitions for this, but the one most widely used as the harvest moon is the full moon closest to the fall equinox. And since fall begins for us in the Northern Hemisphere on September 23rd, this full moon fits the bill. So get outside with your friends, family, neighbors, and pets the night of Sunday, September 27th.
Finally, a night eclipse.
Just for you, Dean. He's not a morning person.
And start by watching a gorgeous sunset in the west.
Then turn and face east to watch the supermoon, harvest moon, rise.
And a lunar eclipse begins at 9:07 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, with totality between 10:11 and 11:23 p.m.
And the full moon returns to normal after midnight. It should be an amazing sight.
Keep looking up.
A lot of times people think, well, marine debris is the trash that I see when I go to the beach or maybe when I go and visit a local stream or waterway. But that's just the debris that you can see. Marine debris is submerged It's floating around in our oceans.
Often, not only will you find the conglomerates that have multiple types of net in them, you also find pieces of plastic, parts of floats. You'll find a lot of laundry baskets.
Marine debris is any solid material that enters into the marine environment, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Marine debris is a global problem that affects all of our oceans across the entire planet. Floating marine debris is oftentimes mistaken for food by marine mammals and sea turtles. Whether it's a plastic bag that looks like a jellyfish or shiny pieces of plastic material that may resemble fish, these animals will go after this and eat it, and eventually it will cause them to starve. And this is because their stomachs will become full of plastic and they won't feel hungry and they won't find the need to eat. Derelict or ghost traps that are found under the water in areas such as the Chesapeake Bay or Puget Sound oftentimes will continue to fish for crabs and other animals. And the problem with this is that there's no one to collect them. So a net or a trap that is just rolling around under the water will continue to collect animals that will eventually die. Ghost nets present a very big problem to the habitat in the oceans, especially to coral reefs, as a net can smother or block out the necessary sunlight that they need. It also damages fragile habitats and the pieces of coral.
A lot of these nets that we find in the ocean are related to the fisheries industry, and it's not something that we can point a finger at and say, this is, your problem, you need to clean this up. We're all responsible for this problem based on the fact that we all like fish. So what we're trying to do, instead of pointing fingers, is take responsibility for the problems that we see. And it's not just one country's problem, it's all of our problem.
Marine debris is generated from various sources, from the large industrial and commercial end down to the specific individual behavior. When a person doesn't put their trash in the proper place or fails to recycle, a lot of times their trash ends up in the stream, in a waterway or storm drain, which is carried out to the rivers, which is carried out to the ocean. There are things that you can do to help the problem of marine debris. You can do the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, or recycle. It's very easy to do this, and it goes a long way towards preventing marine debris.
Here's a look at today's sea ice edge, and grease ice continues to form across the northern coast. We still have leftover ice from last season right here just north of Prudhoe Bay, but everything that's forming along the coast right now is mainly grease ice, very thin and very, very new, let's say, not very thick at all. But the ice across areas well offshore continues to expand, and look for that to continue with earnest. However, southerly winds have brought in a tremendous amount of warm air across the north, so that might slow down just a little bit in the coming days. On top of that, a new outlook is posted at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Scroll down just a little bit, about midway through the top part of that page, and you'll see Sea Ice Outlook. Make sure you click on that and read up as it applies to you. Here's the forecast for southeast on Friday. Look for stronger southerly winds to develop across the Lynn Canal, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. South and westerlies through Stevens Passage, about 10 knots. Those remain light through Clarence Strait as well, though, from the south and east. Onshore winds running around 15 knots across the outer coast, about 4 to 5-foot seas there. Saturday, a strengthening westerly flow, 20 to 25 knots along the outer coast with 7 to 8-foot seas. And south and southwesterlies through the intercoastal waters, 15 to 20 knots with a 3 to 5-foot sea in all areas. Now in south central, look for southwesterlies coming up the western Gulf. Probably looking at some higher gusts there as the winds are shifting around a little bit more. Inside of Prince William Sound, 15 knots with a 2-foot sea, and stronger south and westerly winds coming up Cook Inlet. Southerlies on the northern end at 25 knots, 35 knots in Shelikof Strait, and westerlies cutting across the western Barrens at 35 knots with a 6 to 12-foot sea across Shelikof Strait. And that's not where that's supposed to be, so my apologies there. We're looking at the north coast now for Saturday. Northwesterlies coming across. This will just be a sneak peek here. South central, I'll tell you quickly that winds should be settling down as we get into Saturday there, so look for some dramatic improvements there. Now back to the Alaska Peninsula. West and southwesterlies coming across 25 to 30 knots. 8-foot seas are expected there, with 6-foot seas on the North Pacific side. 25 knots are expected by Friday, and that picks up a little bit more from the south and west on Saturday. 25 knots in Bristol Bay, with 30 knots across the Pacific coastline. 8 to 9-foot seas expected there from Castle Cape all the way out toward Falls Pass. Now for the Aleutians, southerlies for the central and eastern chain, 25 to 30 knots. 7 and 9-foot seas are expected, with 10 to 12-foot seas from Nikolsky all the way to Adak. A slight change out in the west with winds switching around a little bit on Friday. They'll go light to about 10 knots with an 11-foot sea, and by Saturday turn northerly to 10 knots with a 7-foot sea. Look for south and westerlies to continue for the central and eastern chain at 20 to 25 knots, 9-foot seas along the Pacific coast. For the west coast, northwesterlies will pick up tomorrow from St. Lawrence Island and Gamble to the St. Matthew Island waters and Nunivak Island. 20 to 25 knots, 6 to 7-foot seas there, 7 to 8-foot seas from the Kuskokwim Bay region out toward the Pribilofs with a 20 to 25 knot wind, and then switching around to a north and easterly flow, 20 to 25 knots in the north and 25 knots in Kuskokwim Bay, but only 15 knots from the east for the Pribilofs. Now, up north, we'll do this again. Southerlies coming from Dead Horse to Barrow on Friday. Northerlies up to gale strength outside of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope and into Kotzebue Sound. So there's going to be some stronger northwesterly winds there. By Saturday, things improve dramatically. This, I should say Saturday, you've already seen that there, but conditions dramatically improve for Saturday as winds drop off to about 10 to 20 knots for the northwestern coast, and conditions continue to improve across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and winds improve in all areas. And that is because the air is marching through fairly quickly on a very cold and blustery note through the central interior and the west. At 987 millibars, this is a first major punch of winter here. Look for high surf advisories for the northwestern coast, all the way from Wainwright around the Horn into Kotzebue Sound and the northern sections of the Seward Peninsula. Winter weather advisories are posted for the interior, where as much as 2 to 5 inches of snow will fall. Most of that's going to be above 3,000 feet for many of our viewers and listeners there. As the frontal boundary stretches eastward, look for conditions to greatly improve across the north slope and the northwestern coast by Saturday as high pressure settles in. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.